Welcome to part 18 of the mod making series for locked loot containers. In this one, I plan to add the stuff that I was talking about in the last episode, where the chest material values and stuff like that, involving all that. Um, so what I did is I added two new files to the scripts for our mod. One called LLC Enums, which is just a copy and paste of the Daggerfall Unity Enums script. And I kept a few things for my own reference that I will change. And this is basically where I'll be storing a lot of the stuff for later use, or easier use and stuff like switch case statements, such as all the different material types that I plan on using, like sort of down here in metal types. I'll basically be using this, but with a few of them removed and then the one or two added, like wooden and such. Um, and then probably a few other things I'm sure will be in here, a good few other things, especially later, but right now it's probably going to be fairly simple, just the materials and such. And then the more important one, I guess, not so much even important, it's just, this is the one that I'm calling another script called chest generation, which I'm probably going to be putting most of the helper methods and stuff like that involved with chest generation, stuff that would maybe modify or determine or have formulas for when a chest is created and what to assign to it and stuff like that, what properties to give it. And this is different somewhat in that, I mean, I'll have to see later, obviously, what exactly I want to do, but I'm personally one of those people that I don't have much of an issue of most of my stuff being in the same class, because I don't know, to me it makes it simpler for the most part, because usually I'm doing the same kind of stuff in a lot of cases. Like for something like LLC object, that one makes sense to have in a different class and everything, because that is a whole entire separate like object that is doing stuff. But for so many things that I do, it's a lot of helper methods basically. So I personally don't generally like use a lot of different classes, except like here and there for organizational purposes. And this is basically what this is. This new one, chest generation, is basically just there for organizational purposes. But in practice, it's in the same class as our main right now, at least. You know, maybe I'll make a separate class that'll be like helper methods, and it'll just be stuff like this. But for right now, I did something that is called a partial class. So I changed the main to have public partial instead of public class. So public partial class, and then our class name and everything. So what this partial does is it's essentially there so like, I guess primarily so people that are working on like a team, like multiple people can work on the same class or the same script in different environments and make changes to it, um through this kind of partial class thing. So like one person could be working on one file and change stuff, and then another person could be working on another file, but it's in the same class because it's a partial, and change stuff in their own thing without affecting the other person and such. That's the idea, but I kind of use it as, since I have this all in the same class, it's like, okay, well, I'll just do a partial class, and this way I'll have a separate script that I could use as an organizational tool. And that's essentially all it does. It's like calling this public partial class just means that these two are essentially the same thing. They're just in a different script file-wise, for my purposes, organizationally. Like, in practice, they don't change anything on the compiler side, as far as I know, and all that stuff. It's just for the human organizational part in this case. So that's all I changed so far. But yeah, I'm gonna do some stuff as I have been doing off camera. I'll be doing a bunch of stuff, adding stuff, and then when I am done with that and satisfied, I will start to unpause the recording and try and explain what I did. So I will be back in a moment. Okay, so I got a little bit of stuff done. So first on LLC Enums, I got rid of all the other stuff that I wasn't planning on using, and I added these two new enum values, classes, whatever you want to call them. That being chest materials and lock materials. And they have the values in them as you'd expect, all the ones that we added. I have none, just for the sake of it, I guess, if I want to use something like that, or have that as a uh, check for an error or some deal like that. It's kind of useful to have, and also fills up the zero, so then I can just go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 instead of worrying about 0. But then yeah, I got the other ones: wood, iron, steel, orcish, mithril, dwarven, adamantium, daedric. Got it for both the chest materials and the lock materials. One might ask why I don't just use the same ones in this case. Well, I don't know, because maybe it'll change later and might as well have it different materials, different ones for each one, so it's more clear, I guess. I don't know. And then I kept this one as well for potential later use, just as an example of what these this thing is, this attribute, I guess, flags attribute that you could put on an enum. And I guess all that really does is it basically marks this as a enum value that can have multiple things, multiple parameters, whatever you want to call it. Like, instead of just being one value that you could give, is that you could technically have it be multiple. And that's kind of what a flag is, where it could be like a binary thing of bits, and then each one can represent one of these attributes based on that. And then you could use these things like, I guess, called bitwise shifting or whatever, bitwise things, which lets you change each individual bit from one, or is either a 0 to a 1. You can have maybe like 8 bits, so it's like it's like 8 zeros, and then you can change each one individually to a different one, and then that each one of those being something different would represent a different thing that has been toggled here, basically, a different attribute. Like, I guess in this case, if the first 0 was a 1, then you'd have auto aliasing here activated. If the second was a 1, then you'd have ambient occlusion activated. If you had the third 0 as a 0, then you'd have bloom deactivated. And then if you had all of them as 1, then it would have all of these activated. So it's a pretty useful thing when you actually think about it. Even though I don't fully understand the actual, like, I understand the application, but I don't fully understand how to actually, like, use that, in terms of, like, its syntax, I guess, but I'll figure it out more, I'm sure, later on. And I'll probably use this for stuff like, certain properties of the locks, definitely something involving, like, trap types and stuff like that, like, you know, potentially different traps with different kind of, like, things attached to it, similar to the spell effects. Like, you could have, spells that are allowed to be either, you know, a projectile or a touch spell, but they can't be something else, that kind of deal. So I'm just keeping this here so for later reference, which I will most likely use for later things I work on in this mod, like specifically in this case most likely being traps later on. But that's the enums for now. And then I went back to LLC object and I cleaned up some stuff a little bit. I put some comments here and there just for my reference to clarify what I plan to do with certain values and attributes. I cleaned up some of the stuff, and I put some of the stuff I'm more, like, planning on using, I guess. Just changed this around organizationally, but specifically added the chest material thing as I wanted, and then under that the chest sturdiness, and then chest magic resistance based on that material, but also its own individual thing depending on whatever random value it's given later on. And then under that, lock material, lock sturdiness, magic resistance, lock complexity, lock jam resistance. Um, oh, and I added the another bool value up here, has hidden component, or has hidden compartment, which I plan to have as a thing later on. That, you know, I'll work on with the loot and stuff, where basically I actually got this idea kind of from the game Darkest Dungeon, because the way they described it is that if you opened up certain chests, like, you know, the things at the end of rooms, you would just, like, you could just open it up normally, um, and you'd get whatever loot, like, was in there, or whatever generated. But if you used a key, an item, like, as a modifier to it, it would say that you would find a hidden compartment and you'd actually get even more loot, which is pretty damn useful. And I was kind of like, you know, that sounds like an interesting idea. Uh, wait, you know, even though it was very simple in that game, it was mostly just a line of text. But in this case, I'm like, well, that sounds cool. So, like, if your character is perceptive, well, okay, well, a chest would first have to generate with a hidden compartment, which would be based on some factors and random, basically, you know, like whatever other stuff it'd be generating with, but it would have a chance to generate with a hidden compartment as a, you know, flagged with one, basically. But then if you inspected it, depending on your character's, like, perceptive skills, like perception, their attributes, various attributes, whatever, their own lock picking skill, other skills possibly that would be checked, as well as their luck itself, their attribute, that would determine basically if they were able to find this hidden compartment, or determine that it had a hidden compartment. And when you unlock the chest, that hidden compartment would, I guess, would allow you to access the contents of it, or it would just modify the loot, basically. That's the idea behind that, and I think it sounds like a cool idea. What the heck not? More rewards for those that are skilled in what they're doing, or whatever, in what their craft is. So I think that's not a bad thing. But that's the attributes that I added. Basically nothing special. Just the ones that I already had listed, basically, to the chest object class itself, whatever LLC object. And that's all I've done since I paused. But what I'm going to probably work on next, if I continue working on it, which I probably will for at least a little bit, maybe like another half an hour or something like that, depends. I'm gonna go into the chest generation class, quote unquote class. It's just a partial class of this, but the chest generation script here. And I'm probably gonna start dumping the stuff that I've did in this main script here, the main, like, file, and dumping some of the stuff in there, such as, where is it? Yeah, such as this, like, add loot chest on transition dungeon interior. I'll probably add that into here, because that's part of the chest generation kind of logic, I guess you could say. But with that, I'm probably potentially gonna start going into more details with this. Like, as I said, this is all placeholder for that generation part, where I was just doing it for cemeteries and such. Now I might actually start work. Now that I'm kind of at that point, I might actually start working on the specifics of that and refining this. So it's like, oh, okay, these chests can generate in dungeons, and then maybe even if I feel like I start trying to do the stuff for the generating inside buildings, interiors and stuff, palaces and everything, the different, especially the different dungeon types, what kind of what kind of modifiers will be given to them to generate for certain things, like all those details and stuff. So that's probably what I'm gonna do now. Uh, after I pause this recording, and whatever I do involving that, just as I did here, I will when I get to that point, I will unpause, and then I will try and explain what I did. So, once again, I will be right back. And I am back once again. So, what I changed was a few things in that time. And the first thing I did was I took out of the main script here, and I just copy and pasted the, what was it? Yeah, add loot containers on transition dungeon interior. I just took that out of here and I put it into loot generation here at the top. And in there, I added a new switch case that is basically going to, this if statement here doing the cemetery is basically going to perform that and more to some extent. So the switch case, instead of just being for the cemetery in this case, it's going to check for every dungeon type that is in the game. So, you know, crypt to ruined castle to dragon's den to volcanic caves to cemetery, all that stuff, and everything in between. And in these, I'm going to change the I'm going to give some modifier values for each one, basically each type, which will then be used later on in this whole method to actually do the generation of the chest and what materials it should have and such. At least what chances certain materials should be there, what chest type, what materials are allowed there at all. So this part's going to be removed eventually, this part, but I'm just going to probably copy and paste this behavior, obviously, later on and refine it. But for right now, that's what I want to work on is what type of stuff, the properties that should be modified for each different type of dungeon in this switch case statement here. I'm not going to do that right now, but later when I actually work on this, probably tomorrow. But that's all the stuff, and I'll be doing that. But with that, I also added another enum value here, which is quicker than I was expecting to use that new flags thing that I kind of learned about. So now I have a new enum called permitted materials. And it has all of these things in a sort of binary, I forget what the term would be, like the binary numbers, whatever the heck it's called. So it goes from like it's 0, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 40, 64, 128. Basically just multiplies by 2 for each one. That's how the binary kind of thing works. When you change one thing from the next binary digit to a 1 or a 0, it does that kind of. Don't listen to me how I just said that. It's not a good way I explained it, but that's the idea. So I'll be able to, in theory, at least that's the idea, to use these permitted materials somehow here, to basically give some fairly simplified, at least hopefully some fairly simplified value, text-wise, like so it doesn't take up the whole screen, to put in these values and basically say, okay, in this dungeon type, these materials are allowed, but these are not. Something like that. Like the big ones will be like, they probably won't be that much different for a lot of them. For a lot of them, it'll probably just be everything, like down here. And for very few, it'll be nothing. That's just kind of there for reasons, for the sake of it. But for stuff like wood, like, at least to me, if you're in a volcanic caves, you probably wouldn't have wood chests, or if they were there, they probably wouldn't, they'd probably be burned, or they probably would catch fire, so they probably wouldn't be do very well in there. So for something like volcanic caves in this case, I'd probably say, okay, so do everything besides wooden ones. Um, and in stuff like maybe prisons, maybe only allowed wooden chest, or very not allowed most of the other ones besides like wooden and maybe iron, something like that. Um, yeah, I mean, I think you get the idea of what I'm trying to go for there. So hopefully I could use this enum value to make that job a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier when I get to it, which I hopefully will get to tomorrow. But yeah, that's the main things I did today. And it might not have seemed like much, but as I keep saying, it is surprisingly good progress in my opinion, which I'm pretty happy with. But yeah, before it gets any later, I'm going to end this recording for tonight, and hopefully I will continue on this tomorrow and make even better progress. But thank you very much for watching. Hope you found it interesting, and I will see you in the next one.